Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Now this is a slightly delayed video from last Sunday, so this is going to be more of a Sunday style video than a Wednesday style one. And we are going to leave Europe behind once again and sail across the pond, and we're going to look at the armies of the War of 1812, particularly the recently founded Republic of the United States of America. Now it's a slightly different kind of video, this one. It's the first of a new series in which I'm going to do quite a quick whistle-stop tour of the companies out there that make sometimes the less represented nations, shall we say. And the idea there is to look at manufacturers who make figures that we can just buy off the shelf and use, and to look at other manufacturers that make figures that we can perhaps convert or kit bash in order to make the figures that we need. Now, I wanted to do this video so that when we do the how to start on the US Army, we've sort of got a grounding, you know where I'm coming from to do with that. And I also thought as well it'd be quite nice to perhaps shine a light on some Napoleonic miniature companies that, you know, aren't the norm, basically, because it's an army that's not so usual. Sometimes we can get those manufacturers that we wouldn't necessarily normally think about. Now, I'm going to be talking about black powder and 28mm. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be black powder, but I'm going to be talking about 28mm figures here. There's going to be ones for different scales. Hopefully, particularly with the conversion ideas, you'll know yourself, for argument's sake, if you play 20mm, then your 1/72 scale, then you'll be like, oh, well, he recommends this unit. This is the equivalent unit from HAT or Zvezda or whatever the case may be. If I miss out your favourite manufacturer or even just a manufacturer at all, please let me know in the comments. It's almost certainly not deliberate. And I'd really like to see if there's ranges that I've missed. I'm always happy to find new manufacturers and new kinds of ranges. And I'm not going to review the figures necessarily here either, although I may give my opinion on which one I think is the best value for money or the best buy. Now, first off, I should say as well, sorry, that this is going to be the infantry video. I am going to do a second part. That's going to be cavalry, artillery, and high command. But today we're just going to be looking at the different kinds of infantry that are available to either buy for the US Army or that you can convert from. Now, first off, I thought we'd look at manufacturers that make miniatures specifically for the War of 1812. Now, there's three main ones that I can think of, all of which are actually based in the United States, although one of them does have a UK distributor. So we'll talk about that one first, and that one is Old Glory. Now, that's a company that has been around for longer than I can remember. My first wargaming shows were the Triples in Sheffield, and I can remember Old Glory being quite an established name then, like from my earliest memory. So they've been around for a long old time, and they've still got quite a lot of fans out there as well. Now, they do 20 packs, which includes infantry, cavalry, and artillery, and they also include specific regiments, such as the 5th Maryland Volunteers, who had quite a distinctive headdress, and also, you know, those other specialist units, such as the New Orleans Freedmen of Colour Regiment. Now, as I say, I'm not going to go into a review of the figures, but I would say, for me, they are a very old company, and I sometimes think that shows in the quality of their minis. Now, that said, if you like Old Glory ones, then absolutely go for it. They've got a great range. And, you know, I would recommend those if you like that kind of stuff. Now, the second 1812 specific company I want to talk about is another American one, and that's Brigade Games. Now, Brigade Games is an absolutely huge company. They sell tons of different periods, and they're also something of a distributor for other companies in the US as well. Now, you will be seeing a lot of Brigade Games miniatures in my army, not necessarily my US army, but in an army that's coming up for October. I'll just leave that there as a bit of a tease. And if you're in the US, then these guys are definitely a company worth looking into. They make 19 packs for the US during the War of 1812, and that represents the US forces and their Indian auxiliaries. And again, there's a good mix of artillery, cavalry, and infantry there. Now, I can give a little bit more suggestions for these than I can Old Glory, because I actually own quite a few Brigade Games miniatures. They're World War I French I've got an army of, and they're very, very chunky. I've got some stuff for the October project, and I've also got some of their War of 1812 American stuff. Now, I will say that it is very small figures. They are nearer 25mm, which incidentally Old Glory is also marketed as 25mm. They are closer to 25mm than they are 28mm. So while you can have your own units of them, if you try and mix them in with, say, the Perrys or Warlord, they're going to look like children next to the adults. So I would recommend, if you're going to go down the Brigade Games route, then you want complete battalions rather than trying to mix them in. Now, I've actually got a regiment of their light dragoons as well. I've painted all the horses, and I'll be honest, I'm a little bit disappointed with the horses. The detail wasn't great, the poses weren't spectacular, and they were quite small. I got the riders, I got them ready to paint, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I ended up packing them away, and if I get a chance, I'll take a photograph of the horses to show you. But like I say, the riders, I just couldn't bring myself to paint. Now, that said, I am a huge fan of Brigade Games. I think it's just in this case, they perhaps weren't necessarily quite so good. But I will definitely be ordering some more of their infantry. In fact, I'm going to use Brigade Games American Infantry to represent my Marines, because they had a quite different uniform. They had like chevrons across the front of their jacket. So, and they have uncovered shakos as well, with the smaller shako plate. So I am going to use some Brigade Games miniatures. Just be aware though, they don't mix, certainly in the same unit, with more, shall we say, UK-based manufacturers. Now, the third company that do War of 1812, I am very torn about. Now, these are a company that I think a lot of people may not have heard of, particularly if you're not interested in the War of 1812, and that's a company called KNUCKLEDUSTER Miniatures. Now, again, this company's been around for quite a long time. It's quite new to me, I have to say, and their 1812 range is absolutely massive. It is, without doubt, the most comprehensive 1812 range out there. They've got around, I lost count, but they've got about 40 packs just for the US alone. Now, these guys cover all the basics, your trifecta, your infantry, cavalry, artillery, and these guys have, in addition to having specific US Marines, which Brigade don't have, I don't think, they also have US Navy, which is quite nice. It's only 2 packs. You've got regular sailors in one and command in another, but it's something nice. It's something a little bit different. And they do have something which is completely lacking from any other range, and that's specific personality figures, including, shall we say, a particularly animated General Winfield Scott. Now, Winfield Scott's quite a cool guy, so I don't mind him having him. But yeah, he is rather animated. Now, again, I will say about the KNUCKLEDUSTER miniatures, they do have a very specific style, shall we say. They're actually quite similar to Elite miniatures, actually, I think. Now, I am aware that Elite miniatures, and thus KNUCKLEDUSTER, they do have their legions of fans who really, really do like that style. I'll be honest, I don't. I really don't like that style of figures. If you do, then all power to your elbow. You go large on those. I have to say, though, that they're not for me, but don't take my word for it. Check them out yourself, have a look, and see what you think. Now, particularly, check them out on their website. And the reason I say check them out particularly on their website is that the KNUCKLEDUSTER Miniatures website, if you're interested in the War of 1812, is absolutely incredible. It's such a great resource centre for the War of 1812, and even better than that, they have their own mini supplement, I guess you could call it, their own mini codex, whatever, and it's for the Niagara campaign, and in that they include specific lists for the battles of the Niagara campaign and the stats for black powder. Now, some of you will know, I did a video a few weeks ago which puts up my idea for the stats of black powder. I have to say, I'm almost certainly going to revise them in the view of the KNUCKLEDUSTER Miniatures pack. In fact, I may end up throwing them out altogether and just using the KNUCKLEDUSTER's Miniatures ones. It's really, really good. And they've also got another section on their website, another free download. So these are all in the free download section. And that is, it tells you how to make up the different units using the different packs of figures. Now, obviously, it's using their own figures, and yeah, it's fully understandable. But you can use those and extrapolate them to your other ones as well. So if, for argument's sake, you say, oh, well, these guys look like these dudes from a different manufacturer, then you just swap out the number that it tells you need, and you've got that what you prefer. Obviously, you know, if you can support KNUCKLEDUSTER for putting all that effort in, then do. But, yeah, for me, their miniature style's not quite what I'm looking for, but they are really, really good for their resources on their website. I've printed out the Niagara book, and myself and General Dan may have a look at refighting some of the battles, perhaps tweaking them so it's not US and British. It might be, for I would say, Austrians and French or something like that, but the scenarios I may steal and pass off as my own. Don't tell General Dan. Now, I'm not going to talk about prices so much here because most of them are in the US, so it's difficult to really gauge what's good value and what isn't, because I don't really know the US gaming market. But what I will say is all three of those manufacturers do have battalion deals, which will save you a bit of money, and they may have sales, I don't know, but I do know that Brigade Games definitely does have a Thanksgiving sale every year, and for the last 3 years, I have put in a substantial order with them, shall we say. So, yeah, keep an eye out for that, but Brigade Games definitely do a Thanksgiving sale every year, so it's end of November, start of December. Keep an eye out for that one. Now, actually, now I think about it, another company which has a US-specific figures, a range, I know I said there was 3, but I've just thought there's a fourth one, and that is Wargames Foundry, once the absolute powerhouse of the wargaming world, certainly the Napoleonics and biblical worlds. They have fallen from favour in recent years. I think perhaps their approach to the, shall we say, the wargaming sphere has not quite changed with the times, shall we say. Now, these minis are very expensive. Now, I said I wouldn't talk about the prices of the others because I'm not a US hobbyist, but I am a UK hobbyist, and believe me, the Wargames Foundry ones, they are not cheap. They are the Games Workshop of figures, and it's probably cheaper to import figures, actually. Now, I will say, though, that for their cost, the Wargames Foundry figures are absolutely gorgeous. Now, I don't know if they were sculpted by the Perrys. They may have been. If not, they are certainly of that standard. Now, they have 24 packs, and they are quite short, but they are chunky monkeys, I have to say. They are not slender like the Brigade Games figures. So, although they may be roughly the same height, the Foundry ones are much, much chunkier. So, I would not mix them in the same unit. Now, oh, hang on, no, actually, no, I've just had another. God, this has got more endings than Return of the King, this section. But now I think about it, I think North Star has some 1812 figures as well. They've just released Muskets and Tomahawks 2, which is set in and around the War of 1812. So I think they've got packs of figures. In fact, looking at it now, I can see they've got 2 packs of militia and an officer. So, you know, it's not perhaps setting the world on fire as the greatest range of War of 1812 figures out there. But, you know, they are there, so give those guys a view as well. See if you like the look of their figures. So we've basically come down to there being 4 ranges of figures that do War of 1812 specific minis. And, you know, the North Star ones are just sort of 4.5, shall we say, or 4.25, perhaps. I should have said about the Wargames Foundry ones that if you've got enough money, or maybe a spare kidney that you can sell, you can do a full army out of them. They lack the specific regiments, perhaps, but you can, you know, get a full US army out of there. So, having looked at the manufacturers that make range specifics, range specifics, I don't even English. So having looked at the manufacturers that make ranges specific to the War of 1812 and the US Army, I thought our next stop would be at manufacturers that don't do models specifically for that era and, you know, that conflict, but ones that we can convert, even if it's just by changing the paint job. Now, before we start, it's worth pointing out that the uniforms for the US Army actually changed quite a lot across the war, particularly when you look between the regulars and the militia. So we'll be looking at sets that are usable at some point during the war. You know, if you were that bothered about being absolutely historically accurate, you might not necessarily want to mix these units in the same army, but I'll leave that to your own research, because to be quite frank, I'm not well read enough on the subject to be able to give you advice on that yet. Hopefully I will be when I start doing my deep dives into it. So by that similar note, these will be close enough conversions. They're not going to be exact, and yeah, they should be good enough. Now, one of the things that I found with Napoleonics is because, well, it's not just Napoleonics, sort of regimented warfare, I guess you could say, is that there's very little opportunity to convert models. So if you are someone who likes the modelling and converting aspects of the hobby, then these manufacturers and these ideas, I hope, will provide a spark that will get you having, you know, an army that's something a little different and can get your creative juices flowing, shall we say. So we'll start off by looking at the line infantry. Now, anyone who has seen my live streams, particularly my more recent ones, where I'm painting the Waterloo starter set, will know that I am painting up the Waterloo British out of that set to be Americans. Now, the Belgic Shako is different from the American Tombstone Shako, but particularly with the front plate, they're very, very different. But luckily, the vast majority of manufacturers that do British line for the Waterloo campaign do them with their Shako covers on. Now, underneath a Shako cover, the Tombstone and the Belgic look exactly the same. So that's great. We can get any covered Shakos from pretty much any manufacturer out there. Now, obviously, I'm going to look at plastics. There are a million metal manufacturers out there, but I'm going to look specifically at the plastics. And the three main ones for those are the Perrys, Warlord and Victrix. Now, I would avoid the Victrix here. I actually quite like the Victrix British, but I wouldn't use them here. And that's because they don't have the covered Shakos. Their Shakos are out and proud, and they obviously look very different from the American ones. It's not bad, but if you can scrape away most of the British plate, you can get the American one there. Could look pretty cool, but for the ease of getting started, I probably wouldn't bother with those. The second option, Warlord Games, they do separate Peninsular War and Waterloo British box sets, so make sure you don't get the Peninsular War one. They're actually okay. I like the fact that they're marching. Marching figures are always super useful when it comes to Napoleonics, so it's pretty good. As I say, I've used the Waterloo Warlord Games, and I think they're fine. Now, the one that I would go with, and we'll come on to the more sort of exact reason why a bit later on, is I would be tempted to go for the Perrys. Now, the Perrys, they are action posers, so they're either loading or firing. So, I mean, that's quite nice, but yes, some people like the look of marching, so if you like that, don't go for the Perrys. If you don't mind the action shots, then do go for the Perrys. But what I like about their set is that you get both the heads and the tailcoats for the officers for both the Peninsular War and the Waterloo campaign. So you don't have to make that choice between which set you buy. And that's really good because American officers tended to wear bicorns quite a lot. Now, the British officers wore bicorns in the Peninsular War. They tended to wear Shakos at Waterloo. So the fact that you've got the bicorns included in the Perry set, for me, makes that the best choice to go for. You get more bang for your buck in that set. That said, I wouldn't purely go for the Perrys because they're all in those action poses. So I would mix the two, get some Warlord in there, get some Perrys in there. Even if you end up having brigades, a brigade of Perry, a brigade of Warlord, I think that'd be fine. But just the fact that you get the longer tailcoat and the bicorns in the Perry set, I think makes them the slightly better buy. Now, at this point, you can see on the screen a battalion from the Waterloo Star set that I have painted up as Americans. You can see I have bought and added the Metal Command. They look a little bit bare at the moment because I looked at the companies that make flags for the War of 1812, and Flags of War was the one I was going to go with. So it was, 11 o'clock at night or something. So I was like, all right, I'll order those tomorrow. And then first thing the next morning, I woke up to a Facebook post saying, thanks for all the orders. I'm going on paternity leave. I'll be back in 3 weeks or something like that. So, you know what? I think that's fair enough. I think I won't be too annoyed that he's having some paternity leave. I think that's fair enough. But seriously, I think the unit works really well. All I've done is painted them blue instead of red, and I think they work fantastic. When the banners get added, I think they're really, really going to look the bee's knees. So that's for the American line units. The next type, and this is a real rabbit hole of a category, but we're going to look at the militia units. Now, bear with me. There's a lot of different militia units out there, and they wore a lot of different uniforms. I'm going to broadly divide them into two, into one I'm going to call frontiersmen, and I'm going to call volunteers or militia. Now, the frontiersmen were volunteer militia. They're the same thing, really, but the main difference is in the uniforms. The frontiersmen, I'm talking about the men who wore effectively buckskin outfits, so they've all got like the stitching on, the fringes and things like that. These tended to be more light infantry. They were like woodsmen and things like that, but you got them from, you know, the bayou of New Orleans right up to Vermont and Maine and the Canadian border. So you got them throughout the whole thing. My favourite ones are the Ohio ones, because they are in like the classic buckskin colours, but you've got absolutely tons of them. Now, the first place I would look for those is any French Indian Wars or American War of Independence range of figures. Now, the ones that I'm going to talk about in detail today are the ones from Warlord Games. They were originally Wargames Factory, so they aren't necessarily the greatest models in the world. I just bought a box. I'm going to put them together and I'll get some photographs up in a future video. I haven't had time to put them together yet. They are their plastic colonial militia from their American War of Independence range. And they've got a really good variety of bodies. There's 5 different bodies per sprue, and they have different loading and firing poses, which is pretty cool. You don't necessarily want them all to be marching because they'd be that much more irregular type formation. Now, the big difference between the uniforms, and I use that term loosely, the fashion, I guess you could say, of 1812 and 1776, mainly comes around in the hats. Now, the box comes with enough tricorns for the whole unit. Tricorns had very much gone out of style by the 1812, so I had a count, and there are enough heads that you can equip the whole unit and not use any tricorns. And that would be a mixture of these like weird sort of woolen, like they're almost like cap comforters. If you've ever seen World War II British Commandos, they kind of look like those sort of woolen beanies. They're a bit weird. So there's a mixture of those, and what I'm going to call preacher hats. So sort of like, they're like a top hat, but with, they're like a bowler hat, but with a really wide brim. They're like black when preachers wear them. Sort of those hats as well. So it's a little bit weird, but yeah, so those are the hats that you get in the box. Now, most of the pictures I've seen of the uniforms of American militia tended to have round hats, so that is like a top hat. So there's a few ways that you can go with this. You can just ignore that and say, well, these are the hats they've got, and that's fine. They are a militia unit after all, so the uniforms are by and large conjectural. Or you can source your own round hats, your own top hats. One thing that I probably would do with the cap comforters, as I'm going to call them, I'm sure they've got a proper name, is I would probably use some green stuff and sculpt them into coonskin hats, sort of like Davy Crockett style, just to change them up a little bit and give you that little bit more wild man aesthetic, I suppose. I'm going to ignore the round hats because we're going to talk about those later, so I'm just going to ignore them for now. Basically, I'd just say leave off, don't use the tricorns, and you are good to go. Now, one thing that I would say, in addition to this, is there is one regiment called I think it's the New Orleans Rifles, and they basically wear gingham. Now, I've painted tartan before, and yeah, I mean, if you can paint gingham, if you ever painted or can paint a battalion of the New Orleans Rifles, then I take my hat, be it a preacher hat or a round hat or a Davy Crockett hat, then I take my hat off to you. Very, very well played, because there's absolutely no way I could paint them. Now, as I said, the other thing to do would be to scour any French Indian Wars or anything like that. Look for that type of miniature. There is, I mentioned earlier on, the muskets and tomahawks from North Star, so anything from that range could be quite good. AW Miniatures, I'm going to just give a quick shout out to them because they're quite a small company. They do a pack, it's only one pack of frontiersmen, I guess you could call them, with muskets and an officer as well. So 2 packs, 7 figures. I mean, it's not great, but yeah, it's nice as well. You could do a tiny unit out of them, I suppose. So that's the guys in the buckskin. You also have militia who wore more traditional uniforms. I'm going to call them the line cut uniforms. I mean, they're not really, but they kind of look a lot like line. Now, One of the big features on the uniform is like a bib up the front. It's very unusual to have that on Napoleonic figures, so you might have to just paint that on, or you could sculpt it on if you wanted to, but you'd probably just get away with painting it on if you wanted to. Now, with these, you want troops that look like British infantry, or perhaps something else. We'll get onto those slightly in a second. And you want to look for ones with round hats. Now, the British wore round hats very early in the period, and also their Foreign Service uniform had the round hats. So you look for any ranges that are things like Wellington in India, or in Egypt, or the Buenos Aires campaign, those kind of things, and they might have the round hats on there that you can use in your, for your minis. If you don't mind the slightly more ragged look, then look to Spanish line infantry rangers, particularly the ones where they've got the top hats on. The Perrys do one, I believe. The only downside to that is, and it sounds a little bit silly, is that they're all going to have moustaches, because the Spanish, they love their moustaches. So you're going to have to shave most of the moustaches off. So there you go. What have you been up to today? Oh, I've been doing some modelling. Oh, that's nice. Have you got much done? Well, I've shaved off 24 people's moustaches. So that could do. Unless I guess they could be like firefighters. Like the... anyway, no, I'm going off on one there. Ignore that tangent. Try and shave off the moustaches if you're using the Spanish. Now, something else that you could use is go back to Brigade games. We mentioned them in the specific ranges section because they sell sprues of round hats. They were originally produced by Victrix to go on their plastic infantry. They're now sold by Brigade games, so you can get them from them. One word of caution, though, is they don't come with necks, and they do have queues. So you have to cut the queues off. That's not too much of a problem. But you're going to have to sculpt necks if you're using the Warlord Games figures. If you're using the Perrys, you can probably get away with it. Or you could use the Victrix. I mentioned earlier on, don't use Victrix. Well, you could in this case, if you've got those round hats, then you could bang them on there. Now, I said use the British, but there is actually something else you could use as well. And that would be the Portuguese infantry. Now, I'm going to talk about a specific unit here. I know it's only one, but they do seem to be quite popular, and that's the 5th Maryland Volunteers. I mentioned them earlier on. Because they've got quite weird headdress as well, they're almost like militants, like the early Hussars would have wore, or is it Biz, I think they're called. So they're very similar to those. Now, I wouldn't use the British as a base. I would use Portuguese infantry for that one. And in fact, it's probably worth looking at the Portuguese range. If you're interested in getting some militia, have a look at the uniform. Think, is it British? Not quite sure. Get up an image of Portuguese uniform as well and just compare the two, because there's going to be some that better suit the British, some that better suit the Portuguese. Now, for these guys, I'd use Portuguese, and you can either use heads left over from the Perry's Hussars. Again, though, you are going to have to cut off the moustaches on those because they're all Hussars, so they've got moustaches. Or you could just use a bit of green stuff and build up the Berretina, I think it's called. The Portuguese Shako, build it up round the sides, and maybe just taper it off towards the top a little bit. What I would say with the militia is they've got absolutely tons of different uniforms. In fact, there's one that I'll just quickly talk about. Another one. And it's another New Orleans unit, and they basically look like the old guard. They're from Pluchet, who was the assistant governor of Louisiana, and his guys basically had big bearskins on, long frock coats like the old guard. They're old guard, effectively. They've got peaks on their bearskins, but other than that, they're old guard. So I don't really know much about them. If anyone else does, please leave comments down below, because they look absolutely awesome. They look pretty sick. In fact, as well, to quickly touch on the other figures you can look at, there may be some, particularly if you're interested in the southern states, so places like Louisiana in particular, that the French uniforms might be a better fit. Not many that I've seen, to be fair. You're better off sticking with the British and the Portuguese, but don't discount it as well. Make sure you have a look. The key to this one, I think, is doing your own research, finding either the units that you want to do or the units that you can make out of figures that you know that you can do. So it's going to be a bit of a 50-50 which way you approach it on this one, I think. But just do it the best way that's going to suit you. So going from a troop type with an absolute plethora of uniforms to a troop type with 0 uniforms. And the last one I want to discuss today is the First Nations Indians, the Woodland Indians. Now, most of these fought on the British side, sort of. They were fighting for Tecumseh, for their own homeland. But there were tribes that fought for the US, and I think we'll look at them here. If you're interested in collecting the British side of the conflict, then you can use the same figures as well, because the Woodland Indians, it would tend to be more paint and equipment would be how they would differentiate themselves. Now, again, as with the militia, an obvious starting off would be any American War of Independence range. The Indians obviously took quite a large part of it. In fact, earlier on, the 7 Years' War would be a good range to look at as well. It's been known, I think it's known in America as the French Indian Wars, so that gives you some indication of how much of a part they played in those. And again, we go back to Warlord Games. They do a nice set in plastic. Again, they were originally Wargames factory figures, and they do them, they're multi-part plastics, and they are the Woodland Indians. Now, one of the things that I like about them in particular is they are equipped with, your standard tomahawks and bows and muskets, but they've also got that, war club. I don't know if you've seen Last of the Mohicans, the Daniel Day-Lewis version, but Ginger's Gook, he carries this, war club thing. It's sort of, I'm not really sure what it is. It's you certainly wouldn't want to be hit by it anyway. But for me, it's a good differentiation between the Woodland Indians who use them and the Plains Indians who didn't. Obviously, they were more sort of horses and bows and arrows and stuff like that. So it gives you a good visual indicator there that you're not using Plains Indians, you are using Woodland Indians. Now, another company that make them for the 7 Years' War are Front Rank. Now, I've talked about Front Rank before on the channel, probably not as much as they deserve. They are a really, really good manufacturer of figures. For a long time, they were considered the gold standard, probably until Wargames Foundry really came along and took over that. But they've still been quality. They still are quality. I've got quite a lot of them for my 7 Years' War armies. And yes, Front Rank, very nice. The only word of caution I would give is that they are some chunky monkeys. So you don't want to put them alongside the traditionally smaller War of 1812 figures. So you don't really want them in an army with Brigade Games or certainly Old Glory, because they would be absolutely massive. They'd be like giants compared to them. Perry's and Warlord and the Victrix ones, you can probably get away with a bit better, but just be aware they are quite big boys. So that's just one of those things. The Warlord Games ones, however, they scale relatively well with the Frontiersmen. So they're sort of in the mid-range. They're a little bit skinny, but that you can get away with that, I think. The other thing that I really like is that they are compatible with the Frontiersmen. So you can give your Frontiersmen a tomahawk or something like that, just to individualize them a little bit. We were talking at the beginning about this as an opportunity for you to maybe personalize an army that you don't often get in the Napoleonic period. So, things like the extra tomahawks and things like that, quite nice, or the knives. And you can obviously do that the other way as well. You could perhaps give your Woodland Indian a coonskin cap, or maybe even a tricorn, something like that. And you can mix and match them like that, and you can just get those extra little details in there that can be quite nice. And one final range of figures that you can look at. This is going to be super niche. It's not going to be very long. KNUCKLEDUSTER provide a range of figures for these. You can probably also use Blood and Plunder ones as well, although you are at the very, very edge of what they are catering to, and that is pirate crews or buccaneers, Buccaneer. So down in New Orleans, you had the pirates down there. They obviously took part in the Battle of New Orleans, and they helped the American defenders, most famously Jean Lafitte. KNUCKLEDUSTER do a set of Jean Lafitte's pirates, but you want to be looking really at very similar with the Frontiersmen, I guess. You want guys who are not necessarily in full uniform, but they're in sort of shirt, trousers, maybe they've got short jackets, things like that. You can probably get away with using Royal Naval crews or boarding parties, that kind of thing. But if you're looking for specific for Jean Lafitte, then you want to look at the KNUCKLEDUSTER range. So that's it for our quick overview into where you can source your 1812 US infantry from. We've covered line infantry. We've covered militia, although it's a little bit up in the air with the militia. I'm probably going to do a Maxing Your Minis figure on those. Sorry, a Max Your Minis video on those. We're not going to look at cavalry, artillery, or general staff today. I'm going to do a second video on those. Spoiler alert, it's actually quite complicated. There's more going on than you might think. So I'm pushing that down the road, kicking that can down the road. We'll worry about that at a future day. Now, I've put links to all the manufacturers I've talked about in the description down below, so check those out if you want to have a look. I've also put a link down to the Outpost. As you know, I'm an affiliate of the Outpost, so it helps the channel if you shop from them, and they currently have a sale going on. In the sale is 1 box of Frontiersmen. There were 2, but someone bought one of them. And 2 boxes of Woodland Indians, in addition to some other stuff. If they are not gone by the time I get paid, I might accidentally end up buying them. So please, please, please do me a favour and buy them so I don't have to. One other message before I go. This is going to be the last Sunday, so next Sunday is going to be the last Sunday video I do for a while. I take August off every year, so that will be happening. Unfortunately, the 1st of August falls on a Sunday this year, so there won't be any video then. So this Sunday is going to be the final one for the whole of August, so just over a month, 5 weeks. You are not going to want to miss it. It's something I've been working on for quite a while, and it is the culmination of one of, if not the longest single series that I've done on the channel. So make sure that you check that out. If you're not subscribed, then please do, to make sure you get notifications. Turn on the bell, so that'll give you an alert when I upload it. But until then, I hope everyone stays safe. It's super hot here in the UK. It's reached like 30 degrees. I know my American friends have been suffering through 40-degree heat recently, so it's bad enough here. I hate to think what you guys are going through, but I know in Europe we've had some floods and things like that as well. Australia's gone back into lockdown. So the whole world at the moment, I hope everyone out there is keeping as safe as they can, and I will see you guys next time.